All right, good to see everybody for class this morning. We've got a great number. There's more coming. My understanding is there's a train stopped on Thrasher Pike, so we've got about a dozen people stopped on the other side trying to get here for class this morning. We'll look forward to those when they get here. There are some sheets on the back table. One is for today's lesson, and then the other will be for the last lesson of 2 Timothy. The lesson number 13 covers a large part of chapter 4 of 2 Timothy, and there is a possibility that going through that will take us probably 2 weeks because I don't want to rush through some of the names that are mentioned. You've got Luke is mentioned. We're going to talk about Luke. You've got Demas and Alexander the coppersmith. You've got a couple of folks who have turned against Paul, and we want to talk about those people. And then a number of other salutations. Aquila and Priscilla are mentioned there, and their connection to Paul at the time of this writing. So we're going to spend some time on that. It may take us 2 weeks to get through, along with the last question on that, which will be, what are your thoughts on 2 Timothy? What did you learn from the book? And then we'll be off and running to another study textually. So that means, coming to the end of it, I'd love to have your input on where you'd like to go next. I've got some thoughts from previous input, but I'd love to hear where you would like to go next for textual study. Generally, we like to go back and forth between Old and New Testament, so there's some balance between that. If there's a certain book of the Old Testament you'd like to study, let me know. And if there's some consensus on that, I would love to go back and grab an Old Testament book before we come back to the New Testament. Today we're in chapter 4, beginning in verse 6. 2 Timothy chapter 4, beginning in verse 6. So we are in lesson number 12 today. Chasing the crown of righteousness. Verses 6 through 8. So everybody get turned to that passage. I will tell you, of all the sections in the book, there's a lot that I mean, there's not any that I disdain. I love them all, but some just really resonate, and this is one of them. I love verses 6 through 8. It's so positive and optimistic and hopeful, and I hope at the end of our study today, you see it that way too. It's very, very positive about what's coming after death and the anticipation of that which happens after we die. Okay, let's read verses 6 through 8, and then we've got a couple of questions to guide us through this morning. Verse 6. For I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure is at hand. I fought the good fight, I finished the race, I have kept the faith. Finally, there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give to me on that day, and not to me only, but also to all who have loved his appearing. So let's go back to verse 6, question number 1. There's a lot in this verse, probably one of my favorite verses in the whole Bible. Number 1, explain the imagery of being poured out as a drink offering in verse 6. What is the basis for the word picture, and what does Paul mean by it in context? Also, there's another word picture here in the word departure. What can you find on the beautiful imagery in this word, and to what is Paul referring? What do you gather from verse 6? What do you think? Joel, I see your hand kind of popping up there. Okay. Yes. Very much so. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. When he says, I'm already being poured out as a drink offering, there's a lot of imagery involved in that. There's a word picture being built, but like Joel said, it's based on something that's already been established in the Old Testament. Now, right before we get to that, notice in verse 6, what's the first word in our English translations? For. This happens to be the word that actually does mean because, There's a couple of different words that mean that. Here is the word that means because. And so what he's doing is supplying a reason. What's the last thing that he just told Timothy to do? And you can glance back at verse 5. Summarize that. What does he tell Timothy? Do the work. Be faithful and do the work. Why is he now telling him that? For I'm already being poured out as a drink offering. What would that mean in the context of Timothy? You've got to stick in there and do the work. What's he telling him? Because I'm on the way out. I can't carry on the mission of what I was doing. And so the reason why is because Paul is no longer going to be able to do what he was doing. He could not carry on. So going back to that imagery now, being poured out as a drink offering, it is based on a practice of the sacrificial system in the Old Testament. So here's what I want us to do. We won't have to look at all of these, but take your Bible ribbon marker and just lay it right here in 2 Timothy. And let's go back to Exodus chapter 29. Exodus chapter 29. I'll give you a couple of references. You probably have these already, but Exodus chapter 29. And go down with me to verse 38. Exodus chapter 29, verse 38. Now, in your own personal study and reading of the Old Testament, I know you've caught on to the fact that there's a lot of pomp and circumstance applied to the sacrifices in the Old Testament. There were reasons for those, either to draw attention to God or to draw attention to what the sacrifice meant. There was a lot of physical activity attached to it. So it was more than just walking up, laying a lamb on an altar and setting it on fire. There was a lot more involved to it than that. And many of those sacrifices, in fact, all of them at some point, ended up having a drink offering attached to it. And here's the beginning of it right here in verse 38. Now this is what you shall offer on the altar, 2 lambs of the first year, day by day continually. 1 lamb you shall offer in the morning, and the other lamb you shall offer at the twilight or at night. With the 1 lamb shall be 1/10 of an ephah of flour mixed with 1/4 of a hin of pressed oil and 1/4 of a hin of wine as a drink offering. And the other lamb you shall offer at twilight. You shall offer it with the grain offering and the drink offering. So both had the drink offering. As in the morning for a sweet aroma, an offering made by fire to the Lord. This shall be a continual burnt offering throughout your generations at the door of the tabernacle of meeting before the Lord, where I will meet you to speak with you. And there I'll meet the children of Israel. The tabernacle shall be sanctified by my glory. I will consecrate the tabernacle of meeting and the altar. I will also consecrate both Aaron and his sons to minister to me as priest. I will dwell among the children of Israel forever and be their God. And they shall know that I'm the Lord their God who brought them up out of the land of Egypt, that I may dwell among them, and I'm the Lord your God. So, drink offerings. So as they're preparing, as they get ready to make the offering, the drink offering gets poured on it. What would the purpose of the drink offering be? What are some of the purposes of the drink offering? Okay, one would be the smell. I think that's probably primarily because he mentions it. When you get down in verse 41, he talks about the drink offering in the morning for a sweet aroma, an offering made by fire to the Lord. So as you get ready to you've got the fire started, you've got the fire blazing. You pour a little drink offering on it. What happens to it? It smolders a little bit, right? And it sends smoke up. And this would go as a sweet aroma before the Lord. And that's a beautiful picture in the Old Testament, the idea of something going up as a sweet-smelling savor before the Lord. What does that mean, that it goes up as a sweet aroma to Him? It's pleasing to Him. He doesn't have, physical nostrils that take in physical scent because He's not a physical being, but the idea is it's acceptable to Him. It is in honor of Him. It goes up as a sweet savor to Him when it's poured over the sacrifice like that. Now, there's 2 other passages that expand on the drink offering. One is Numbers 15. You've got the first 10 verses of Numbers 15. And then in Numbers 28, verses 4 through 8, you've got the same that talk about how the drink offering is poured on the altar when the sacrifice is being made. Now, real quick, look at Leviticus chapter 10. Leviticus 10. Leviticus chapter 10. Leviticus chapter 10. A little background. In chapter 9 at the end, the glory of the Lord descends on the camp. So the cloud is coming down over the camp, and there's a frenzy. There's almost a hysteria. It's the first time it's ever happened. The people are they're exhilarated, but they're scared at the same time. And then in chapter 10, beginning in verse 1, the same story, Nadab and Abihu run, and they take strange fire. The Bible says in verse 1, which God did not command, it was an unauthorized fire, and they offer it before the Lord. They are consumed by the fire in verse 2. And then in verse 3, Moses said to Aaron, "This is what the Lord spoke, saying, by those who come near me, I must be regarded as holy, and before all the people I must be glorified." The actions of the priests were heavily regulated. The people couldn't have done it either, but they were representatives of God on this occasion, and they did the wrong thing. And then in verses 4 through 7, you see some of the restrictions that God talks about it, and the wrath of God and how to appease that. And then drop down to verse 8. The Lord spoke to Aaron saying, and I just think this is interesting. It's in the same, two of his sons have just been consumed, and in the same context he says, "Do not drink wine or intoxicating drink, you nor your sons with you, when you go into the tabernacle of meeting, lest you die. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations." What were the priests prohibited from interacting with? Intoxicating beverages. I do not believe, and this is not to chase rabbits, but I do not believe that the drink offering was an intoxicating wine. I don't think that, because the priests were unable to sort of have interaction with that. I don't think that, based on the fact that priests were limited from basically touching it and having interaction with it. So the idea would be some sort of a grape juice was used on the top of the sacrifice. As the smoke would go up, it would honor the Lord. And for those, they indicated devotion and sacrifice to God and consecration to God. It was what was meant by the priest. Now, go back to 2 Timothy chapter 4. 2 Timothy chapter 4. That's the imagery that Paul is using now in verse 6. I'm already being poured out as a drink offering. Paul's life and Paul's ministry to God was considered a sacrifice by him to God, and like the drink offering, this was now the conclusion of his life of service. Now, there's something not just in the act of pouring out the drink offering to God, but if you have a glass and it's full of any kind of liquid and you pour it out, what eventually happens to the liquid? It's gone, and it doesn't take much. It's the final thing that happens when you're getting liquid out of the cup. That's the idea here. I do think it's interesting the way he phrases this in verse 6. He says, "I am being poured out." It's passive. What does that mean? It's in the process of occurring. But if it's passive, what does that mean about his sacrifice? He's been doing it all along, but it's something being done to him. It's not that he wanted to die. It's that it's being taken from him. Somebody is taking his life from him. And I just think there's something to be said here about how his life is being taken from him. And yet, do you detect in this passage any bitterness on the part of Paul? Yeah, he's submitting to it. Do you think, and I'll just be honest, if somebody was physically taking my life and I felt like I still had a lot to do and a family to take care of, I'd be bitter about it. Would you possibly be bitter about that? Angry, maybe even a little bit about that? And, some people would end up apostate because I can't believe God would do this. And I think we would all really struggle with that. And yet Paul's mind and his life and his attitude was faithfulness to the end. And like Barry just said, he was submitting to it. It's not that he wanted that. It's being taken from him. I know that they're based on Philippians 1. There are things Paul felt like he really needed to stay and do, but the fact that it was happening, he was okay with that. Joel?
Well, and I think you've got to question, what can you find beautiful in the word departure?
Yes.
That, he used that word.
Yes.
So, he said, I'm going to be killed, I'm going to be executed.
Yep.
He said, I depart.
Yep. That's right. So let's go straight there, because this is a beautiful word. There isn't just a word picture in the drink offering, right? So he's drawing from the Old Testament sacrifice, the sort of the last thing that happens in the sacrifice, the end of Paul's life, a final thing. There's finality to the pouring out of the drink offering. He also uses that word departure, and Joel mentions it here in connection to that. He understands he's getting ready to leave for a better place. I don't know if you were able to find anything on this. This is one of my absolutely favorite words in the New Testament, because the Greeks use this in secular senses, but in really great secular senses that have deep meaning on Scripture. Were you able to find any of those? I'll give you 4 of them. Okay, there are 4 primary uses of this word that's used here. Analusis is the word that's used here, but there's 4 uses of this. And if you like word pictures, I promise it's one of the best word pictures in the Bible. 4 uses of this word. This is the word that the Greeks used to take the yoke off of an ox. They unyoked an oxen from the plow. Can you see that in your mind's eye? Can you see that word picture? What do you gain from that word picture of taking the yoke off of the oxen? Yeah, there's relief at the end of this. And I just think this is such a testament to Paul's mindset of, as he's facing death, and the passive language would tell us, again, it's being done to him. He didn't ask for this. They're taking his life away from him. And yet he sees this as relief happening here. It's rest from toil. And I can't help but think of Revelation 14:13, that for the faithful saints of God, they are resting from their labors. Because while we're here, what are we supposed to do? We're going to work until the Lord comes back. And we're going to exhaust ourselves in His service. And when death finally comes, whenever it comes for any of us, if we're faithful, how should we view it? It's finally, there's some rest. And Paul sees it as that. This is the moment he gets to rest. And so to Paul, death was rest from toil. We work now, we rest later. And that's a beautiful word picture. The yoke is being taken off of Paul, and that's the way he views death. Yeah, Kevin?
He uses a similar phraseology in Philippians chapter 1.
Yes. Yeah, he absolutely does. That's right. And he always saw it that way, as there's a lot of labor that's taking place and toil in this life. And to Paul, death was rest from that. There's finally rest coming for the faithful of God, because we are wearied, not in a bad sense. It's just tiring. There's a lot of things going on, and Paul saw it as rest. Now here's the second word picture. They didn't just use it as taking the yoke off of the oxen. The second word picture is this. They used it as the word for loosening bonds and fetters. Right? So if you're in prison and you get the fetters taken off of you and the jail doors are opened, what is that? It's freedom. And death for a Christian is release from bondage. That's what the word picture is here. Where is Paul right now, currently, as he's writing this letter? In jail, facing death, facing martyrdom. And yet Paul says, even though I'm in jail and I am about to die, really ultimately Paul saw that as, I'm about to be released. I'm about to get out of here in the best possible way. That's what this word picture means. It's a beautiful word picture. All right, so number 1, unyoking of the oxen. Number 2, the loosening of bonds or fetters. Here's the third word picture. The Greeks would use this same word to describe this event. Number 3, the loosening of ropes on a tent. The loosening of ropes on a tent. What's that tell you? I'm getting ready to go home. Because if you're in a tent, you're a sojourner, right? You're moving from one place to another. And when you finally get ready to pull your tent pegs up, it means you're going somewhere else. But you're going, here he's going home. Pulling up the tent stakes means you're going to move. And Paul is ending his earthly sojourn, and he's going to his permanent home. I'm finally getting to go where I can be home, Paul is saying. So it's the loosening of the ropes on a tent. And one of the last that I can find, the fourth word picture here involved in this word, it's the same word they used to talk about the cutting of the mooring ropes of a ship. So what's that mean? When you cut the mooring ropes, what do? You're leaving, you're setting sail. And to Paul, death was setting sail on the greatest adventure of his life. He'd been everywhere, but he's finally being released from this life to set sail on his greatest adventure. That's a beautiful word that's used right here, and specifically used by the Holy Spirit with deep meaning behind it so that we would see how beautiful that is. Now, is this often our perspective on death? Nope, it's not. And we've got to really work to try to transform our perspective to where that's how we see death. We often look at death and we are fearful of it and we feel hopeless against it, and it's not a passion for us. But it was just the opposite of that to Paul. Paul was passionate about this. He saw death as something really good for the child of God. Yes, Tom?
I have known Christians, more than one, that almost prayed for death. They decided they'd lived too long, and they were looking forward to going home.
Sure. Yeah, there should be a certain expectation that besets all of us. And I think most of us probably are like at the end of Philippians 1 where Paul says there's things I can do here and I'd love to help. I'd be here and stay and do those things. But at the same time, I'd love to go be with the Lord. He's caught between those two positions. But I get that. Some people reach a point when they're like, there's nothing left for me here to do and I'm ready to go. I think we ought to be anxious about it in the best possible way, that it's a good thing for a Christian to die because look at all that's happening in that. Hope is a confident expectation of something better. We sing the song, heaven will surely be worth it all, but sometimes we don't live like that. And Paul lived like that. He understood that heaven is going to be worth everything. So we ought to live like it so that we can die like it. Any other thoughts on that? I just think that's beautiful imagery right there. Okay, number 2. Moving to verse 7. What is the obligation now? There's something that has to happen on the part of the Christian. What is the obligation for a Christian to receive the final reward in verse 7? Why would Paul speak of a fight or a race? And what does it mean to keep the faith? How does this help us to understand what Christian living is really all about? What do you think about verse 7? What do you think of that verse? What do you think, Kevin and Bobby?
Struggle.
It is a struggle.
Fight in a race.
Yeah.
Things you have to try hard to win.
Yeah, I think so, and I think maybe that's what helps us to understand the beauty of verse 6 is when life really is a struggle, that death for a child of God really is a good thing. There's release coming and relief from all the toil, Bobby, and then Art.
About endurance,
It is. It's about staying in there and not giving up, and that's where often the struggle comes from, Art.
When you're in the race, and when I was in high school, I used to run track, and I ran the mile.
Yes.
And you start out, it's fine. About 3/4 of the way through that mile, you're getting tired.
Yes.
You're getting wore down. You've got to really force yourself
Yes.
to push on.
Yes.
Finish the race.
Yes. And for a child of God, what is the motivation to keep on going when you feel like quitting? Heaven's on the other side of it. That's verse 6 and verse 8. So let's talk about this. He gives 3 things here. He says, and there's some vivid word picture here. This whole is a very word picture-esque passage. Verse 7, he says, number 1, I have fought the good fight. Does anybody have a different translation for fight or something in the margins there? And I don't know if it's there. I'm curious because the word means struggle. I have struggled the good struggle. And what is it? Yeah, it is spiritual warfare, right? Laboring earnestly, maybe something like that. The idea is Christianity is a struggle, and Paul had given his all to the struggle. And of all the struggles, this is the interesting thing, if we read it correctly, when he says, I fought the good fight, what does the word good tell us about this particular struggle? Of all the struggles there are in life, what is Christianity? It's the best kind of struggle, right? It's the best one that we can be involved in. It is good, meaning it is what is right, it is excellent, it is beautiful. It may be difficult, but it's the best kind. And so the struggle here is pretty generic. He had struggled against Satan, against against wickedness, against opponents, against temptation. He had struggled against it all, but he had done it. He had actually conquered over all of those. Number 2, he says, I have finished the race. What's the imagery here? I think Joel was onto it just a moment ago. Yeah, and Art was talking about the same thing. You're running a course, and the goal is to make it to the end, is to finish the race. There's a word picture involved in this. I think it's probably involved in all 3 of those. If Paul is drawing from like what they would have seen in the games, the sort of the Grecian games that they saw or were witness to back then, you probably would have something like a stadium race where you had a number of laps, like Art was talking about, maybe it's so much to equal a certain distance, like an Olympic course. And Paul is saying, I have finished my leg of the course. I think of his language more like a race where you have multiple players involved and you're passing off the baton, and you have a certain leg to finish. And Paul, because he's telling Timothy, I'm not staying, you've got to keep on doing the work. I'm passing the baton to you. So Paul had finished his leg of the race and was passing the baton off to other people. Our obligation is to enter the race. We've got to be in it. We have to be added to it by the Lord in Acts 2:47. We have to run steady in it and not quit. 1 John 1, verses 7 and 9. And then we've got to cross the finish line. That is our job. Beautiful language. And then he said, number 3, I have kept the faith. If the keeping here is still based on the figure of the athletic games, the idea would be something like, and I've kept the rules. I've played by the rules of the race, and I have finished them faithfully. To keep here means to guard or to observe and do. And what is the faith? What is that? It's the gospel, Kevin. Yeah, something like that. I've submitted myself to it, and I've been faithful to the very end of it. But the faith here would be the gospel. And so Paul says, I've been faithful to the gospel. I've not given up on truth. Ellis?
So this is a little bit different direction with the imagery that
Yeah.
we're going, but I think of a lighthousekeeper.
Okay.
They keep the light.
Yes.
So you're not just standing there watching it, but you're having to light it.
Yes.
It has what it needs.
There's work involved in it. Yeah, I think that's a great idea, because it's not just simply flipping a switch and leaving it alone. It's tending to it. It's taking care of it. I think that's a great imagery. Barry?
I think it's worth mentioning here that complete faith is singular.
It is.
It's not, I've got my faith, 45,000 different denominations. It's a singular
Yeah.
complete faith.
Yeah, he didn't say, I've kept my own personal convictions. He's saying there is the one system of faith, and I've been faithful to it. I've abided by the one system of faith. I think that's a great point. Yep. All right. Now, here's what that means for us. Christianity, contrary to the way, we don't say it, but we live like it sometimes. Christianity is not a single momentary fly-by-night experience. And I think a lot of people think that I've been baptized and I came up out of the water and I'm done. And the funny thing is we argue against and we refute and we contradict and we go against Calvinism's doctrine of once saved, always saved, but a lot of people in the church live it because they stop living for Christ once they've been baptized. They think that's the end of it. And Paul is saying that's not it. And I think Bobby or somebody over here was saying earlier that Christianity it's an investment of our whole life for the rest of our life. It's like Kevin used the idea of making a vow or pledge. It's like signing papers of a commitment. And we're signing on the dotted line saying, I pledge my whole life for the rest of my life. Whatever you ask me to do, for as long as you ask me to do it, that's what I'm going to do. And that's what Christianity is, and that's what Paul was saying. It means Christianity is a fully committed life. It means every day it is a fight to live above sin and do right. It is a full, vibrant life. It's not repressive. It's full of joy and happiness. It's a vibrant life of joy from salvation and love for Christ. That's what Paul is describing here. Steve?
I think he explains that in Philippians. I press towards the goal.
Yes.
That word press
Yes.
is not easy going.
No. It's a full commitment for as long as it takes. I think that's a great reference there, Philippians chapter 4.
And just one other thought too, listen to you, I'm thinking about our VBS coming up.
Yeah.
In the Lord's Army.
That's right.
And some of it is about dedicating a lifetime of service
Yes.
to the Lord.
Yeah.
As being part of the Army.
Yeah, it's tough. It's a tough thing. And that's, back in chapter 2, we saw the language. Paul says, you must endure hardships as a good soldier. And that's not an easy thing to do. So that's right. All right, number 3, the rest of our time here. Number 3, what is the crown of righteousness given by God in verse 8? To what does this day refer? And what does it mean to love His appearing? What does this section tell us about our readiness for heaven and the connection to our lifestyle? And do we sometimes get that part wrong, and how? What do you think about verse 8? Another beautiful verse. I mean, this trio of verses, some of the best imagery in the Bible. What do you think about verse 8? Especially this crown of righteousness. And he's clearly talking about something in the future, because I'm reading New King James. He says, finally. I think King James says, henceforth. The language there, the word literally means for the future. He's talking about something that's still future to him yet. And Paul's hope for the future is that there's a crown of righteousness. What does he mean by crown of righteousness? A reward, okay, very much so. There are actually 2 words in the Greek language for crown. Do you know the words? One is diadem, and that's the kind of crown worn by a king. The other is a Stephanos crown, which is the little wreath they placed on the head of the victor of a game. And the idea here is, by the use of Stephanos, once I have won the race, I get rewarded. I think, Paul, that's right. It is a reward that he gets, a prize for that. But what's the crown of righteousness? There's 2 prevailing opinions on this. I don't think either one of them are wrong. Could be a combination of both of those. One is this. One is the belief that the crown of righteousness is the perfect righteousness that God gives us when this life is over. There's the removal of sin. There's no more threat of sin. There are passages that talk about that. Sin is gone. In fact, death and Hades are cast on the lake of fire and brimstone in chapter 20 of Revelation. So there's going to be no more temptation, no more sin. So it could be that the crown of righteousness is the removal of the threat of ever offending God again. Or, more generically, the crown of righteousness might just be a reference to the blessings that we receive as a part of being in heaven. And I personally think that's probably just the way he's using it here, is that the crown is the blessings of heaven given to the righteous of earth. Tom?
Look at Revelation chapter 4, verse 4. It talks about around the throne were 24 thrones for elders and so, and they had crowns of gold on their head.
Yeah. There's a certain kind of blessedness that we don't yet understand. I don't think we could understand it now, that attends being in the presence of God in heaven. And I think that's it. The imagery in Revelation 4 helps. Art, and then Joel?
James talks about if we resist
Yes.
temptation, then
Crown of life.
if we try, then we shall receive a crown of righteousness and crown of life.
Yeah.
Kind of like the idea that
Yeah.
we resist
Life in heaven is itself the crown there. And then Joel?
And that crown, to me, is a result
Yes.
of our righteousness.
And I agree with that. I think based on what Paul said, I don't necessarily think he's talking about there's the bestowal of perfect righteousness. I'm saying, I agree with you, it's the blessings you get from being righteous here in this life. And does that mean that you're mistake-free here in this life? But you've been faithful, you've kept the faith, and you've done what's right. Jenna?
Now I've got a reference back to 1 Corinthians 9:24-27.
Yes.
And it's
Where he buffets his body and, yeah.
referencing, the race again.
Yeah,
And
he uses that imagery.
They're competing for a perishable crown, and we are going for an imperishable.
Yeah, incorruptible, imperishable crown, one that does not fade away. That's exactly right, and I think that's it. We can't yet understand it. We have some language in the Bible to just sort of give us a glimpse of it, but we couldn't, in our humanity, we cannot understand the splendor of heaven. There's no way we could understand it. But we're given glimpses of it through language like this, that there's something grand beyond our comprehension that's going to be given to us, and we're going to be given a crown because of righteousness. Not that we're owed it, but that we've been faithful, and God will reward that behavior in heaven. Now, who's it going to be given by? Verse 8. The Lord, so that'd be Christ. He's the judge. He'll be the one granting that. And what kind of a judge is he? A righteous judge. I can't be for sure. It's a question I want to ask Paul, because obviously there's a contrast here to human judges who do show bias and prejudice and things of that sort. And I wonder here if the language is this. I don't know. I'm going to ask Paul one of these days. Was he convicted finally by a judge who just was not a righteous judge? And the contrast is here, I may have been convicted by somebody who didn't understand my case and who was preferential in the way he treated me, but I'm going to be judged most of all by the one who doesn't do that. And I think that's kind of the language that he's using here. God will always do what is right. Jesus will do what is right. Paul was politically sentenced. We know that. Jesus does not act that way. Jesus is not unfair. He's not unjust. He is fair and just. The crown, Paul says at the end, is not just for him, but to all who love his appearing. What does it mean to love the appearing of Jesus? It is. I think verse 7 is the answer. If you love the appearing of Jesus, what are you doing in verse 7? You're fighting the good fight of the faith. You're finishing the race. You're keeping the faith. And people who do that are also going to receive a crown of life. Is that not just the most optimistic and hopeful passage? I love that passage. Okay, so we'll put a peg in it here. When we come back in verse 9 through verse 22, which is a pretty long section, you've got Paul's final comments to Timothy, which includes references to a lot of folks. You've got Demas in verse 10. You've got a number of folks like Crescens and Titus in Dalmatia, and Luke, Mark. You've got Tychicus, and then you'll see Carpus and about the books, and you got Trophimus in verse 20, and Alexander the coppersmith. There's a lot of folks that are mentioned there. We're going to try to figure out who they are. And Onesiphorus is there in verse 19. So a lot of people we've seen before, and then we'll talk about his final recommendations and what he possibly means when he says, I was delivered out of the mouth of the lion. What does he mean by that? I thought Daniel was the only guy that ever survived lions, but apparently Paul did too. All right, so I covet your prayers. We're leaving Tuesday for Branson, Missouri. That's the beginning of polishing the pulpit. And they're going to nearly kill me. That's their job. They're going to try. And somebody said, you got about a dozen lessons. I said, there's more than that. There's some that aren't even listed because there's some private sessions where we're doing some recording on some private things. So I've got, it's like doing 3 gospel meetings while I'm gone. So it's going to be a lot packed into a week. Ashley speaks a number of times too. So please pray for us. We'll not be here obviously this coming Wednesday and Sunday because we'll be in Branson, but we'll be coming back after that. But just pray we'll be safe and that we do a good job in representing North Hamilton, because that's our goal. We want to represent this congregation well and make people proud of this congregation, because we love this church and we love you, and we want to be good representatives of this congregation. Of course, of Christ, but here too. All right, thank you. We'll put a peg in it there. And I need your recommendation.